Hey everybody, Jackal's Painting here with a brand new video. We're back with our awesome Demon Prince in part 2. In part 1, we did all of the airbrushings, that's where he's at right now. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I take this guy and basically every other project that I do from this place into being a finished model. His arms are magnetized, so I'm going to be putting those on this little lid here in our nice sub-assemblies. And we're going to be doing a couple of different techniques in this video, one of which is stippling. We'll get to that in a minute. The first thing I do with this workup after all of our airbrushing is we're going to do some splotchy rust and paint chipping. So I'm going to take my foam here, I'm going to cut a chisel into it with my scissors, kind of rip up the end of that chisel to make it a little rougher so we get nice little chippy speckles and stuff when we touch it to the model. I've also got my self-closing tweezers. These are super handy so you don't strain your finger muscles when holding this little piece of foam. Super good investment for like $3. And the color that I like to use with this workup is burnt sienna. It's a nice dark brownish orange. Works really great as a contrasting color to our desaturated gray green and really pops on the model as that nice full-bodied splotchy rust. It's the same color we used for the airbrush undercoat that you can kind of see in the recessed details and on the bottom surfaces of the model. It's really easy. All you do is load up your brush with that paint and then dab it off on a piece of paper towel. You can see I'm kind of testing it out on my skin here to see that I got just a little bit of speckling, because we don't want huge splotches. We want lots of little speckles kind of clustered up together. And we put those around the hard edges and places where the armor would scrape. And you also want it sometimes in deep recesses and around things like bolts or rivets, where that moisture and grime would accumulate and eat through that paint and then rust that metal. So the first step is kind of just to save us a lot of time. We're not doing everything with the sponge weathering. We're just saving ourselves a lot of time by doing bulk work with it. And then after that, we're going to go back with that same paint color in our paintbrush, and I'm going to get into all of the spaces that I could not reach with the sponge. So you can see now I'm getting into those recessed areas around the trim and the nuts and bolts and just edges that I couldn't reach with the sponge, that kind of thing. And just doing very small little splotchy maneuvers with the brush there to get into those places. It looks great if this is erratic and a little random, but that does not mean to go crazy with the brush. It does not mean to slap it on everywhere. You want to be meticulous about where you're placing this. With that done, we're going to move into blocking in all of our other components on the model. I'm going to start off with this little tabard crotch robe thing that he's got going on. I've got burnt red, dark purple, and I'm going to create a dark maroon mixture with that color. It's pretty close to 50-50, but if it's not dark enough, you can always add more drops of the purple paint. And then I'm just going to base that in with my brush here. Just get a nice, solid, even base coat. Once that's done, we're going to start stippling. And let me explain stippling because I have not used it on the channel before. So this is a way to layer up semi-transparent paint in a very fast, easy style where we can create gradients on the details of our model without having to go through the hassle of airbrushing it, because sometimes these areas are too small and you don't want to get overspray like on his cloth here. And it's also a great way to add texture and character to a portion of the model. So he's got this nice decayed, ripped up moth-eaten cloth, and I want it to be rough. I want it to look rough spun. I want it to have a texture. So what I'm doing is I have some semi-transparent thinned out paint in my brush, and I'm just barely touching the model over and over and over again, kind of like pointillism, I think is that old style of painting, where we just have lots and lots and lots of little dots and little splotches layered on top of one another, and we go up through lighter and lighter shades of paint. So after going back with just the burnt red, I'm mixing in some of this gray into our burnt red to kind of desaturate it a little bit, and I'm going to lightly go over those areas again. And as these layers and layers of little dots dry, that semi-transparent paint will mute out and fade into the previous coat, so we have that nice dark to light contrast gradient that we like on our models, because it looks cool, and it looks realistic, it looks nice. And the reason I want to get into this is because I do glazing a lot on a lot of my projects, and it's the same principle. You're layering semi-transparent paint one on top of the other, going from dark to light to create a nice smooth gradient and realistic color contrast. But this is very easy because it's not nearly as hard to mess up, if that makes sense. Like, glazing is really delicate and it takes a long time, so try out stippling if you haven't tried it before. Really easy technique to master. Now we're going to get into our metallics. I've got our bronze, I've got our golden brown, and I just grabbed some of that maroon into my brush and I mixed all those up together to create this dingier, brassy bronze color. If you didn't know, bronze and brass, the contrasting color to those is a violet color. So having just a little bit of that purple violet mixed into that gold, yellowy, brown metallic creates interesting effects. It kind of ages the metal nicely, because I don't want our brass to be shiny. I mean, this is Death Guard. Everything's dirty and corroded. So I want our bronze to be recognizable and to pop on top of our grayish green, but I also don't want it to be brand new polished. I want it to be aged. So adding in some of that purple helps that effect. After we've cut in all of our bronze metallics, I'm going to grab some yellow ochre and some light umber. I'm going to mix that up about 70-30, 70 being the ochre. And the brown is just going to make the yellow ochre a little bit darker, and it's also going to help that lightly pigmented paint stick to the model a little bit easier. And I'm using this for all of these nasty warp, pustule, gross bits, these pimply things that are popping out all over his armor. Just going to baste those in nice and simple. Once that's dry, I'm going to go back to our golden brown, and again, I'm going to be doing some stippling. So I'm going to get some thinned out golden brown paint, and I'm going to very lightly stipple that paint onto the domed surface of all these little pimples. Let that dry. Usually takes about 2 coats. So I'm going to just go around rapid fire, and then once that's dry, I'll start over and do a second coat. And then once that's dry, we're going to start building up that dark to light contrast. Then I'm going to grab some olive flesh. This is going to be our little pop color. Get that kind of sickly shine color to these little pimples. Have them pop out. And again, I'm just lightly stippling those on to where I want them to be the brightest. After those, he's got all of these little I guess they're supposed to be like little wormies, little maggot kind of things writhing around and growing in and out of his armor. So I'm going to grab some magenta and just carefully base coat those in. You could do like a actual kind of beige maggot color, but I felt like that was too boring considering the wild colors that we have everywhere else on the model. So I went with this magenta to really make them pop out and to seem weird and gross rather than realistic. And once that's dry, I'm going to grab some pale pink, and this is our pop color for that magenta, And again, I'm just going to go lightly in there and kind of stipple that onto the little ridges and details of all these little maggoty things and pop those out. For our steel metallics, I've got our dark silver, pretty standard stuff. You can color mix into this to change it. You can use blues if you want it to be more of a blue steel. You can put in some browns or orange if you want it to have kind of a rusty patina. For this guy, I'm just going to do straight dark silver, which is a nice dark kind of pig iron type color that I think suits the Death Guard nicely. So I'm just going to base in all the stuff that I want to be steel on the model. Our model has a handful of skulls on there, and I'm going to show you how I kind of go about that. I've got our olive flesh and that same light umber. I'm going to mix those together about 50-50 to create a darker brownish beige, and just very simply base coat in all of those skulls. I find that with these lighter colors, especially with bone colors, it's easier to start off with a very light base coat with some brown in it and then go over that, because even something like our desaturated green that is kind of faded out and not what we would consider a dark color, it's still quite a bit darker than our bone color, so it's going to have trouble covering that. So that's why I always mix in a little bit of brown to our base coats. Once that's dry, I'm going to come back and start stippling in the highlight with the olive flesh by itself and just start to kind of rough in our details and get some highlights going. Again, just a couple of coats of all those little teeny tiny little dots layered up on top of one of each other and highlight up that way. And then after that, I'm going to grab some ivory, very bright, shiny ivory color. That's going to be our final little pop detail, where we're going to have the most brightest kind of bleached sections of these skulls and pop out the details on the facial bones and things like that. I wanted a nice contrasting color for the eyes, and flies are known to have red eyes, or at least in cartoons and stuff. So I'm going to grab our burnt red again and very simply block in a base coat for these big old bulgy fly eyes that he's got. Once that's dry, I'm going to grab some bold pyrrole red, which is a very bright fire engine red, and I'm going to start stippling in a little radial highlight, meaning that the point of bright is going to radiate outwards from the center of this sort of spherical shape. So I'm going to build that up starting from the center and radiating out with our stippling. And then I'm just going to grab some of that same olive flesh that we had on the palette and start lightly mixing that into our bold pyrrole red to create a desaturated mix of those two colors, and stipple that in smaller and smaller so we have kind of a little soft glow effect in those eyes. I don't want it to be like neon glowy. I don't want it to be like illuminated. I just want them to have like a little bit of that, spooky eldritch glow that demons are known to have. And that's pretty much it. Everything in our base coats is blocked in. We still have all of our clean airbrushing on the sword and the wings and our talons and all that fun stuff. And so after that, we're ready for a wash. And in between getting all of that stuff done and getting ready for the wash, I went ahead and hit him with a gloss varnish and then let that fully cure. We're going to be using our Mr. Weathering Color Multi-Black Oil Wash. And for this guy, we've already got so much contrast built in through our paint job, I don't think we need a heavy wash. So what I'm doing here is pouring some of that solvent into our little bottle cap, and then I'm going to pre-dilute the multi-black into that solvent so that it slips and slides over the model very nicely. It's not going to be as powerful because that pigment is being diluted and broken up inside of the solvent, and it's going to be much easier to clean when we start doing the cleaning and blending part of this oil wash process. And then I'm just going to start applying the wash. I'm just very gently touching it to the model in a few places, and if it needs to kind of get some help and be moved around, I'm going to very gently touch the model and help that flow into all of the details. You can see how I'm just kind of touching the model and letting it run into the details, and then once I give it a handful of seconds to kind of get where it wants to go, that's when I'm going to start blending out, especially on really bright colors like the wings. I want to make sure that I'm cleaning those off and blending that color out so we avoid any sooty type residue or coffee staining. And I'm not even going to touch the sword. I want the sword to be clean. I want it to have that glow effect, that magical sword effect. So I'm just not even going to put a wash on there and let the airbrush do all of the work as is. And you can see that I'm going around and just anywhere where I want to make sure that there's no coffee staining, no shading going on, I'm just constantly cleaning out my brush with the solvent and then blending and wicking away that extra wash from the model. You can see that some of it kind of runs down, got on my sword a little bit, wanted to clean that right off. And then when everything is dry, just hit it with a varnish. You can see here he's matted back down. Get our nice soft shade into all the details, and the very last step is we're going to pick out that rust a little bit more. Got our Agent Orange here, very bright orange. I'm going to thin that out, and then just very gently and lightly I'm going to find some of the bigger rusty splotches on his armor and highlight those up ever so slightly with that bright orange to pop them out. In my opinion, this is kind of an optional step. You don't have to do this. On things like my rhinos that are much bigger models with lots of open space, I just let the rust do what it do. I don't think it needs a highlight to create contrast. But on smaller models like this, where you want some of those details to pop more, especially because he's kind of like the leader of an army and he's going to be a centerpiece, on the bigger splotches, I want to pick those out a little bit with that bright orange just to add that little bit of extra flair. And that's pretty much it. He's done. I really am starting to enjoy this kind of retro 90s style paint job. A lot of bright colors, a lot of desaturated colors kind of creeping into the pastel range. A lot of vibrant colors as well to create contrast between the two. Not really going to mess with his base because, you know, you can paint your bases however you want. I just wanted to show the model itself because that's what the big thing is, this brand new model from Pop Goes the Monkey. I'm going to have a link for that model down in the description. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you next time.